And then once we track drums and we get the parts right, do an edit them, and then we move on to guitars. And my thing with guitars is I do everything DI first. That way, we're not focusing on guitar tone. If we're going to, are we going to like this guitar tone in a week or two or the next day? So everything.
Is this for metal or for any rock?
This is
like any
anything electric guitar related. So if it's clean guitar, if it's, punk rock, kind of overdrive guitar, everything's DI in, and I use a Kemper or STL. Now for like the indie rock bands that I work with, a lot of them use like crazy pedals. So we'll go pedal board in first, and that way they can use all their cool delays and reverbs and stuff like that they like to use to make their guitar sound. But the actual amp, we're running as a plug-in first.
Right. So, you're just doing something that works real quickly, and then you could dial it in later.
Yeah, that way we can make sure the guitar parts are correct. Are the arrangements correct? Back in the day, you used to set up a guitar amp and be like, cool, do we like where the gain's at? And the guitar would be like, yeah, sick. You send the first mix out, and they're like, actually, there's not enough gain on that guitar. And then it's just like, well, that's what it sounds like. or we have to come back and retrack it. So, yeah, the reamping process, I love it. It's so much faster, and that way too. It's just like you may think you have a tone that's working, and then you might get into your mix, and you're just like, this guitar tone is not working for the mix. So the ability to kind of change it on the fly and reamp it is so crucial to me, at least.
Wow.
So
I feel like it's actually a really solid debate because on the one hand, like the tone might not be right, but on the other hand, like the tone influences the feel of the player, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes, they're responding to the way whatever it is they're listening to sounds.
Yeah. Well, also too, the first thing I do with a band is when we start tracking guitars is, for the first maybe 10, 15 minutes, we are trying to dial in a plug-in tone that does give them that feel. And that, like,
right.
It's not going to be too far off from what the end result tone might be.
Right. It's like 80% of the way.
Yep. Yeah.
Or something.
It's just like, hey, I know this part's supposed to be overdriven, but here's a clean tone.
Yeah.
So, no, we
that
definitely
wouldn't work. Right.
Get it dialed into a tone that's going to work for them. So.
And then when you reamp, you're reamping like real amps in a room with a mic, or are you just doing that with a Kemper?
So, actually, right before COVID popped off, I moved into this studio in summer of 2019, and I used to be super against Kempers and like profiling guitar simulations and stuff like that. But STL came out with their version, because STL is a company that makes all these like Axe Effects and Kemper profiling packs. And STL was just like, why don't we just come out with our own interface system in Pro Tools, and people can still use all of our packs and stuff like that. So I got that, and I started using it, and I was like, this sounds really good. And I was like, man, I was like, this, like, and it, like, it doesn't take as much time. You're not moving microphones around for hours. And so I started using that, and I started sending mixes out to bands with that on it. And now I had Ingles, EVH 5153, Mesas, Orange. Like, I had so many guitar amps.
Wow.
And different cabinets and stuff like that. And I started sending mixes out to bands, and they would be like, this guitar tone's amazing. And I was just like, that's a plug-in. Okay. Like, they like it. And I remember I realized it had been like almost a year that I didn't even turn an amp on. And they were just sitting there, and I was like, man, I was like, I should, like, that's easy money sitting right there that I can just sell. And I had a hot debate with myself for a while of like, do I want to be a studio that doesn't have any actual guitar amps? And
maybe just keep one,
Yeah, no. And I remember I was doing this death metal record, and I had bought an Ingle Powerball 2, which is a killer metal guitar amp, and guitar players would come into the studio and just be like drooling over it. And I was like, yeah, man, I was like, we can use that. And they were like, yes, I want to use that for my tone. So, I would reamp with it for hours and hours. And But there was this death metal record, and I was on the fence of like, all right, am I about to sell my gear? And I did a shootout. I set up the cabinets, I set up the head, I reamped with it. And it was probably about an hour or so. I was, dialing in the tone, and I already had the tone that I liked on STL with the plugin. And I just flipped back and forth. And I was just like, my plugin tone sounds a little tighter, and it got me there, an hour and 40 minutes faster.
Damn.
And I was just like, I'm selling them. And
man,
I sold them all right before COVID popped off. I saved that money, and then I bought ATCs later that summer.
So there you go.
And yeah,
good investment.
Now I do have bands that I talk to, and I meet with them, and I work with some guitar players that are like, "Oh, I'm a purist. We got to use a real amp." And I'm like, "Cool. Like, I kept the reamp box. Like, bring your cab in, bring your amp in, and let's make your guitar tone." And 99% of the time, those guys, when we start a record that way, they're like, "Oh, I want to use my 6505." But when we're done with tracking guitars and we start kind of getting done with vocals, 99% of the time they just go, "You know what? That tone sounds sick. Let's just use it."
Man, I love this conversation. I feel like, I don't think I have a strong opinion because I'm only on the computer, but I'm a bass player. So like, I've never even tried to own guitar amps. You know what I mean? I could play the guitar, but I'm not like, I'll do like the slowest possible John Mayer kind of solo.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I could do. But so I'm not even like a valid voice in this debate, but like, I love this side of the debate of like, like just it works faster and it works like, because people will argue, like, no, the amp, it really does make a difference and depends who you ask,
Yeah.
But I love this. This is a great story. It's a great like real world experience of what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah.
And the plugins are just getting better, man. These plugins just sound better and better.
They are.
It's the what's it called? I have the Slate bundle and their new amp thing. I was like, man, I don't like this. It's like not working for me.
Yeah, I haven't checked it out.
But then I use but they have like I don't know what it's called, but it's like the Kemper, but it's like a profiling amp in a plugin. It's the same as the STL. Yeah. Right? It's the overloud one. And I was like, I was not into the overloud like thing with the way their amps work and the whole like interface wasn't working for me. But then I started using some of they gave away like a pack of some of those tones, and I was like, oh shit, this sounds really good. Yeah. Like whereas like the plugin wasn't so good, but the actual profiling amp was amazing. Yeah.
No, there's a lot, and I was against it for so long. I remember I did a record once. This guy had a Kemper, and he brought it in, and he's like, "I'd like to use it." And I was like, "You realize the Kemper profile you're using? I have that exact amp right here." I was like, "We could just, and we ended up going with, my live amp that we used, but, that was quite a few years ago, and they've come a long way, and nowadays, I love it. It's so much faster, and it's great as like you're transitioning, through the mixes too. If you're just like, I need a little bit more bite on those guitars, and instead of like reamping the entire record or trying to salvage the tone with, some EQ, I can literally open the plugin and go, give me a little more treble, a little more presence. And, that's better than trying to add air to the EQ, and just creating so much more harsh frequencies in my mix. So
that's awesome, dude. Let's talk a little bit about mixing. I know you're a proponent of hybrid mixing. Yeah. Tell me a bit about what your approach is.
Yeah, so definitely a hybrid style mixing of in the box, and I have a Dangerous 2-Bus Plus summing mixer that I use. Honestly, that's my little, I guess, secret weapon if I had one. I love that thing. Once I got that completely changed my imaging and my mixes. And, and there's people that are like, oh, you don't need, there's always going to be debates of like, oh, summing amps don't do anything, or they add everything to the mix. But I'm a believer in them. I love them. I stand by them. I think if there was a fire, I'd probably try to take that. Yeah. And but
I would take my hard drive.
That too, yeah.
But I hear that totally.
Yeah, so all of my entire mix goes through my 2-bus plus. It's from Dangerous. And I have 4 mono switches, and I remember when I first got that box and I hit the mono switch and I heard vocals for the first time summed through a mono channel. I was just like, I've never heard vocals the same. Like, you always hear those pop records, like Justin Bieber's record just came out. You listen to his vocals and they're just like, they're so center, they're so clear. And I always struggled for so long.
Interesting.
To kind of get that. And then when I bought the box and hit the button, I was just like, oh,
man,
this just got way easier.
Wow.
And same with, bass, kick drum, snare, anything that's panned down the center, goes through my mono summing channels of my Dangerous 2-bus.
Wow. Why do you think that is? That's so cool.
Well, in the technical term of it is like, you run a program like Pro Tools and it's ones and zeros that are programming it to go center and stuff like that. Or it's programming it to go left or right. But when you go through a summing box, it's analog hardware that's panning it to go center and making the image of the stereo mix actual center. Because everything goes through my 2-bus and then it comes back into Pro Tools stereo as a stereo input. So everything gets summed into that and comes back into Pro Tools. So,
re-recorded into the computer, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I have to reprint it. And so anytime someone's like, can we get a quick print of, a quick bounce? It's just like, I don't have quick bounce. That's not a luxury for me because I have to play everything in real time. So,
but it's the cost of doing business with the analog summing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, I switched to analog summing, I think in 2018, early 2018. And from then I was just like, all right, like I want to get certain things as an analog outboard gear. Like I want to create my vocal chain with analog gear. So it's like the SSL 611 EQ, TubeTech PE1C, LA2A. And it's like I have those 3 pieces of analog gear because that would always be my vocal chain. It's like I would use the SSL 611 EQ, and then I would use the Pultec EQ, and then I would use like an LA2A for vocals. And that was my in the box mixing chain. But I was like, I want to create an analog outboard, vocal chain. So I got that, and then just kind of slowly started building everything else. I have my drum comp for parallel drum compression that I use, I have 2 1176s that I use. For vocal comp parallel compression, I have a distressor that I use. And I really just wanted to try to strategically buy, like, what are the certain pieces of gear that are going to make a really big difference on the big key components of my records. So, vocals, drums, bass guitar, those types of things. Unlike the guitar debate, I still think, vocals will sound better through a Real Teletronics LA2A any day over the Waves LA2A
Really?
Or a UAD LA2A. It's just like there's something about those tubes and the characteristics that it brings, the harsh harmonics that come out of being in the box. It honestly just makes my job easier using analog outboard gear on the mix side of things, other than, it's definitely more time consuming for sure, but it just, I'm not fighting so many frequencies from my analog gear as opposed to being in the box.
Yeah, I always found that the Waves LA2A plugin had some weird random like frequency things that happened with the artifacts.
I remember when I bought an LA2A and I kind of shot him out. I was like, this thing is absolute trash. I was like, why do I ever use it? So
no, so like I'm currently loving the new Slate LA2A. I don't have UAD plugins, but I'm like, this doesn't have any of those crappy artifacts that and I'm not trashing Waves because Waves has some great stuff, and I know some people that work there. It's an Israeli company, but the Slate LA2A is so much better. It's so much better than the Waves one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've heard people say that, like, you know, when they model these pieces of hardware, they're usually not getting the best one in that. Like, you know, if they're going to like Ocean Way to get like an LA2A, they're getting